Hello and welcome to our next installment of Living Theosophy. When we started talking about this, the idea of health and illness came up, and I jumped all over it because for me, I believe that health and illness is my spiritual path. It's a big part of it, so I thought this is something I can absolutely talk a lot about. So when I started thinking about it, besides myself, the first one who really came to mind was HPB. Her life was riddled with just all sorts of illness, disease. Her body wasn't very strong. So I thought about how her life, how she was able to use her experiences to make herself more enlightened and walk her own path. So I looked here at, I found this letter on Mahatma letter number 33 by Mahatma Moria, and he said, "The least we can do for a person who has devoted her whole life to serve us and the cause we have at heart, it is to preserve her body and health for her whenever she may need it again. For such is the wish of us all. Perish the Theosophical Society rather than be ungrateful to HPB." And I thought about through her whole life when she, way back in the beginning when they came in, she fell off a horse and they picked her up to make sure she wasn't too severely hurt, all the way to the end where they came to her and said, "You can leave now, your body's falling apart, and you can have peace, or you can stick around and help write the secret doctrine, and it would be the greatest accomplishment ever." And she decided, let me take this carcass with me and I'll get it done. Come hell or high water, I'll make sure it happens. So they were very grateful to everything she did for the society and tried to help her every step along the way. So when I started thinking about health and illness on the spiritual path, one of the first things that comes to mind is this idea of karma. So when we learn about karma, everything that happens in our previous lives we bring with us, and it's kind of the blueprint for the life we have here. So everything I've done comes here. So HPB also went on and talked about reincarnation and how karma keeps bringing us back, so we have to play it out. So in the collected writings, someone had put the question to her, must you come back? Is there no escape? Do we have to keep coming back and reliving these lives over and over and over? And she says, if your material desires are unexhausted at death, you must. Desires are forces, and we believe in the conservation of force. So this kind of made me think about that idea of physics, which I'm not great at physics, but a body in motion will stay in motion. If we think about desires as a force and not a matter or materialistic thing, if they remain there, we will be drawn back whether we want to or not. So if we're moving and we're pulled in that direction, we will keep going, despite what we may desire. You must reap the seed of your own sowing and reap it where it was sown. Your new life will be the exact result of your deeds in your preceding life. No one can escape the punishment of his sins any more than he can escape the reward of his virtues. That is the law of karma. You must go on being reborn till you reach nirvana. This idea of punishment and reward kind of threw me for a loop, or this idea of sins. I didn't really like the wording of that, and I see it more as an outcome. Whatever you do, there will be an outcome or a consequence of that. So if you make a specific choice, you're going to have an opportunity in your next lifetime. That's how it's going to be presented. So if I make a choice to hurt someone in my next lifetime, I have the opportunity to remedy that or not. If I did help someone in my last lifetime, I will have the opportunity to reap the benefit of that reward or not. So it's not necessarily a, if this, then that. It's not a direct correlation, but I see it more as you're constantly being given opportunities to make your higher self evolve and become a better person. You can take it or not, either way. So in looking at karma, I kind of broke it down into two ideas. That you have your individual karma, and then there's also this idea of a global karma. So a lot of times in the writings of Theosophy, the Mahatmas would talk about the karma of the Theosophical Society. So they said, we know we're taking on this karma for the whole society. In that same sense, Illinois has its own karma, America has its own karma, and we're all part of that larger karma. So we're playing out our individual, what does my soul have to do, and where we're placed in this world, how to make that happen. So thinking about personal karma, I kind of think about disabilities or having a lifelong illness or deciding this is something I'm going to put my individual self through so that I can learn a lesson from it. So you might have one person who's in a wheelchair their whole life, or halfway through life they have an injury and they're in a wheelchair. That's their individual karma. For whatever reason, that's what they've chosen. The other part I think about karma is our genetics, because we choose, to some extent, which family we want to be born into, where we want to be born into society. So we come in with this set of genes and DNA that's going to determine a lot of the ideas of what we can or can't do. So part of this theory, too, is HPB gave an example, because she's miraculous, about a man who had killed someone in a previous life by causing harm to his throat in some way. I think he had stabbed him in the throat. So then in his next lifetime, he got throat cancer that would not respond to any treatment. He couldn't do anything about it. And to me, I started thinking, okay, that's kind of, you can look at that as it's the eye for an eye of you did this, so automatically something bad has to happen to you. But when I start looking at it as it's an opportunity, it could have been anywhere between he had a sore throat to he had throat cancer. He could have had multiple sore throats, could have had his tonsils out. I mean, there's a whole range within there. So that's the part where in this lifetime we get to make personal choices of how to deal with things, the opportunities that are come to us from our past karma. Thinking about the global scale and how sometimes our karma will interact with that, I thought mostly about the Boston Marathon bombing that happened last year. That's something that for whatever reason was part of America's karma, maybe Boston's too, I don't know. But of all the thousands of people that were there, only several hundred of them were hurt. And some of that is their individual decision to say, I want to have a disability in this lifetime to learn from it. So that's a situation where we have a global karma issue interacting with our individual karma. There were plenty of people there who didn't get hurt. And their karma might be PTSD or emotional baggage from that or whatever, or taking care of someone who was hurt. So there's a lot of different ways to look at karma and how it affects our health and our illness on the spiritual path. The other thing is illnesses can be brought on by our personal choices. So we come in with our karma and what we've chosen, but our lifestyle here determines to some extent how healthy or how sick we get. Specifically, we think about diet and exercise and discipline. For me, I was thinking about, in my path, I grew up in a house where junk food was readily available all the time. Mountain Dew was the beverage of choice in my house. We had cake and cookies and candy and pie just covering the kitchen countertop all the time. All I ever ate was frozen food. I have no idea how to cook because that's all I ever ate. So for 30 years, that's how I learned to eat and how I learned to live. That's the karma I chose to come in with. Who knows what I did in a past life, but I decided I'm going to be born into a family or an area where nutrition is not very much valued. I lived in Wisconsin, the land of fried cheese. I mean, how much more could I have put myself in a bad place? Now that I'm older, I get to make those choices. I've decided I don't eat meat, I don't drink alcohol, I don't eat gluten. I try really hard to go to the gym and exercise, and I can go home and look and, wow, you're still living that same lifestyle. It's still there. Nothing has changed, but I've changed. So I could let that karma define me and say, oh, well, I've always grown up this way, so I'm always going to eat poorly, or I can do something differently. My individual choices will hopefully set my karma for my next time. So hopefully I'll be born into a family where nutrition is valued. So in thinking about this idea of our choices determining some of our health and illness, Kuthumi had an idea about that in one of his letters, and I cut it down because it was really long and some of the parts were not relevant. So it is not nature that creates disease, but man. So that's really important right there. It's not this idea that things are happening to us, that there's just these germs out there, which there are germs, that's true, but it's not just coming into us. We are choosing by our lifestyle choices how it affects us. The latter's mission and destiny in the economy of nature is to die his natural death, brought on by old age. Save accident, neither a savage nor a wild animal dies of disease. So we were never meant, humans and animals, to die of disease. It's come because of our choices. Food, sexual relations, drink are all natural necessities of life, yet excess in them brings on disease, misery, suffering, and the mental and physical. He goes on further to explain, he talks about ambition, so I cut that part out, but all of this then, food, wealth, ambition, and 1,000 other things we have to leave unmentioned, become the source and cause of evil, whether it is in its abundance or through its absence. So we look at food specifically. To be a glutton is one of the 7 sins, and he talks about that in the parts that are cut out to say, to be really gluttonous is going to cause more pain, it's going to cause problems to your body, obviously, and you're not going to be able to move around as much. But to go to the other extreme and say, I'm not going to eat any food, is just as bad. It causes just as much damage to the physical body. The same thing with ambition, to say, I'm going to have everything in the world and be really powerful. It's not going to, it's going to hurt a lot of people along the way. But at the same time, well, then I'm not going to do anything. That's kind of the idea of sloth. Now I'm not doing anything, I'm not helping, I'm not doing anything for myself or humanity. So either extreme is not good. And then when we push these things to extreme in the physical body, that's when disease and illness is brought on. Therefore, it is neither nature nor an imaginary deity that has to be blamed, but human nature made vile by selfishness. So wanting too much or too little of anything is what causes us to desire too much and bring on our suffering. So thinking about this idea of wanting things to come to us, I started getting into this idea of magnetism. I came across this, a couple quotes by H.P.B., and it was really fascinating. It's very much similar to the idea of thought forms of like attracts like. Whatever is out there, if you're putting out there, it's going to come to you. So she suggests that magnetism, like attracts like. If you're looking for an illness or you have the body prepared or mind prepared for illness, it will find you. If you're living your life healthy and have a purified mind, illness is not going to be able to touch you as much. So we talk about, that's kind of how this works, of you're meant to have a full, long life without disease. When you get away from that idea and you start looking for this or that, then you draw those things to you and disease comes along with it. So she says, in Isis Unveiled, this is a quote within a quote now, so try to make sense of it. Man, he, being Paracelsus, further says, man draws not only health from the elements when in equilibrium, but also disease when they are disturbed. So right there, like attracts like. The elements are out there, we can get either health or illness, depending what we're looking for and what we're attuned for. Living bodies are subject to the laws of attraction and chemical affinity, as science admits. So they've already decided or found, yes, this does happen. The most remarkable physical property of organic tissues, according to physiologists, is the property of imbibition, which is replacing one liquid with another. That word really threw me off. I thought, I've seen this before. what in the world do they mean by replacing one liquid with another? So I looked it up, and of course, imbibe came up. I'm like, oh, right, drinking alcohol. It's been so long, I forgot about it. So, and I never really kind of understood what that meant, but I get it now that when you drink alcohol, it replaces the water in your body and your blood with alcohol, and that's what makes you become drunk and act stupid. So she's suggesting, or Paracelsus in this instance, is suggesting that there's another liquid in the ether out there that is the medium for attracting health or illness or other things. So you can replace whatever you've got going on in here with a diseased fluid from the outside or a healthy fluid from the outside. It sounds confusing, but that's what HPB is talking about here. All right, so she goes on further. This is in, I think, Collected Writings, where she says, she's quoting, wording says, this magnetic sympathy, the accordance of spirits. Everything is drawn to its like and converges with nature's congenial to itself. So everything goes to things that are similar to itself, that are very similar to it. Out of this sympathy and antipathy arises a constant movement in the whole world, and in all its parts, an uninterrupted communion between heaven and earth, which produces universal harmony. So out of sympathy and apathy, things that are like me, things that repel. Things that are, there's a constant movement around the whole world. And as soon as I read that, I thought, oh, like the magnetic poles. We have the North Pole and the South Pole, and there is a magnetic field around the entire Earth. And so she's talking about here, or wording, about how there's this magnetic field around the world, constantly keeping everything in movement, that we can have things connected to us or not. He goes on further and says, everything lives and perishes through magnetism. One thing affects another, even at great distances. So again, if we have this magnetic field around the entire Earth, that makes sense how things could be attracted, good or bad, throughout this ether. And its congenitals may be influenced to health and disease by the power of this sympathy at any time and notwithstanding the intervening space. So I also looked up congenitals because it's different than the word congenial in the paragraph above it. And I thought, what the heck does that mean? And congenitals is things that exist at birth. So what this is saying is the predispositions that you come in with, your genes, to decide, I have a gene for, breast cancer or having strokes or whatever else you might have. Those genes can be turned on or off and influenced to be health or disease based on that magnetic field and the magnetism, what you're drawing to you. I've heard a lot of women talk about having breast cancer and saying, maybe one sister has it and the other one doesn't. And the one who does have it has always had a lot of anger and conflict with other people. So sometimes they could be drawing something in. And when they then are able to change their attitude, things are able to improve quite a bit. So that would be one way that perhaps this is working. Certain genes can be turned on and off based on what we're bringing towards us. So what exactly is magnetism? Because this is a new concept for me, so I really had to look it up. And it says it is a force in nature and man. So again, we're talking about a force, something that's moving, not matter that stays still. This is kind of like we talk about prana and jiva and things that keep things moving along. When it is in the former, which is nature, it is an agent which gives rise to the various phenomena of attraction, polarity, etc. So again, thinking of the Earth with the magnetic field around it. When the latter, in man, it becomes animal magnetism, in contradistinction to cosmic and terrestrial magnetism. So basically, it's different, the force is different between what it is in nature and in man. So animal magnetism, which is what it is in man, is defined in the Theosophical Glossary as a fluid or an emanation. So that's what I was talking about before, that the imbibation, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but that if animal magnetism is a fluid, that would be the fluid that can be put into your body to replace the illness that you might have, or conversely, the disease. Some people can emit it for curative purposes through their eyes and the tips of their fingers. We've all heard about healers, and that was the first thing I thought of was energy healers. People who do Reiki or therapeutic touch, that's what they're talking about. They're using magnetism. While the rest of all creatures, like myself, mankind, animals, and even every inanimate object, emanated either as an aura or a varying light, and that whether consciously or not. So I have a magnetism coming off of me that I'm not even aware of, that I'm not trying to emit, but it's coming off. And if I have an illness and you're receptive to that, you might pick it up from me, which is a lot scarier than even just, the flu going around during flu season. When acted upon by contact with a patient or by the will of a human operator, it is called mesmerism. So this in itself, magnetism and mesmerism, could be a whole other topic to talk about. But this really made me think about energy healing and how that a lot of people are into that and how it's causing a lot of really great miraculous cures. I also thought, there's a lot of new age things out there. I know Brent Baum is coming in a couple weeks, and EFT was just here, heart math. So just thinking about some of those alternative healing techniques, magnetism might be behind some of those. So HPB actually explains how this happens. And again, I cut some parts out because it's really thick and hard to get through. So she goes on and says, the positive vitality or health element may be discharged by an effort of the healer's will into the receptive nervous system of the patient. So someone practicing energy healing or Reiki is going to have a positive vitality inside of them. And the person who comes to receive treatment might have a negative vitality. As they lay their hands over that person, they're putting this animal magnetism fluid into that body and hopefully removing some of that negative vitality or magnetizing it to a more positive vitality. So she says, they touch each other, the fluid passes, equilibrium is restored in the sick man's system, the miracle of healing is wrought, and the lame walk, the blind see, deaf hear, dumb speak, and humors of long standing vanish in a moment. It's pretty amazing. Now I'm thinking, why am I not getting energy healing every day? Maybe I should be. Maybe you all should be. Here's why I'm not getting it. It is of supreme importance that the one who attempts to heal disease should have an absolute and implicit faith in his science and in himself. She does also say that it helps if the patient has that faith. I don't 100% have that faith, so it maybe is not as great for me or not, but for the healer himself, they really has to believe that I'm doing something. Otherwise, do you want to go to somebody who thinks they're cheating you out of it anyway? If they don't believe in themselves and the power of what they're doing, probably not the best healer to be going to. So we've talked kind of about how health and illness comes to us. It can come through karma, our personal karma, our global karma, the personal choices we're making, and then also this idea of magnetism, of how we're attuned to things around us. So now that we know how it comes up, what do we do about it? That's the next question. So I took this wonderful book, Annie Besant's Pain, Its Meaning and Use. It's really great. It's very short. If you haven't read it, you should, because it's very life-changing for anyone who has illness on their spiritual path. So she calls it actually the path of woe. Choosing to take on this path of I will willingly be sick and injured to allow my soul to grow. And she breaks it down into 6 steps that are increasingly more difficult, as all of life is. Number 1, the meaning of pain is to understand the laws of nature, understand that everything is transitory, eliminate our external desires, overcome our ego and our selfishness, learn to live for others, and then learn to have sympathy and compassion. So let's break this down into what it actually all means. Understanding the laws of nature. pain we go through in this world educates us about what the world is really made of and how it works. This made me think of an example in my own life of when I was 6 years old, and my mom said, "The stove is hot, do not touch the stove." And I'm 6 and I'm like, is it? Is it really hot? I don't know. You could be lying to me. How hot is it? Because you turned it off. So I wait for her to go out of the room, and I get over by the stove. And I think I even had to get a chair because I was too small, and I'm hovering over it. And I take my hands and I get closer and closer. I'm like, it's kind of warm, but I don't think it's hot. And I'm thinking this all, I still remembering because it's very traumatic apparently. And I touch it down, and as soon as I touch those coils, scream, my mom comes yelling at me, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I touched the stove." Of course, she's like, "Why did you touch the stove?" I'm like, "Because I didn't believe you." So, physical laws of nature. Pain helps us learn, A, when things are hot, you're going to get burned. That was a pretty obvious one. But number 2, I learned, maybe I should trust the adults when they tell me something is bad for me. So at age 6, that was kind of important lesson. At age 6, that was an important lesson to learn. And so there was no reason for me not to be trusting my mom in that situation. So we learn those physical laws, but also then learning the laws of reincarnation and karma and why we keep coming back. So we start to learn that we don't necessarily, our desires are what bring us back, so how do we learn to not want those desires? My other trip on my personal path here is being gluten intolerant. I really, really love cakes and cookies and pies and anything made of wheat and delicious sugars. It's great. As I said, I grew up in a house where that was readily available all the time, anytime, every day. So I've grown up eating this, being able to satisfy it whenever I wanted. And I'm pretty sure that because of that, now I have gained a gluten intolerance that if I eat it, I will get severely ill. Maybe not severely, but pretty ill. The pain of eating gluten at this point is enough for me to say, I do not want to eat that piece of cake. I know you're delicious, I know it'll be really good, but the laws of nature say I will get sick. So I can increase my willpower and say, I'm not going to eat it. So as we start to separate ourselves from our physical body, this higher self in me, who is not even Amber, never cared about the cake in the first place. So as I start to listen to that person or entity, the cake becomes less important. Secondly, cake is transitory. Cake will eventually leave me. It will all be eaten, and then I'll still want more, and then I'm still left thinking, where's the cake? The satisfaction of eating cake is only as long as I'm eating it. Once I finish the piece of cake, it's gone. That satisfaction is gone, and now I'm still left with the desire for more cake or whatever it was I was eating for. If I was feeling sad or bored or whatever, I'm still left with that emotion. So anything that is eventually going to change or go away can never be truly satisfying to the soul. So we start to learn everything that is not eternal, everything here in this physical world, in the physical plane that doesn't exist, can never satisfy the soul. So it's another step towards separating the physical body from the spirit. Say, this will never be beneficial to the spirit, because it will eventually go away, no matter what. So we start to do this process of turning inward. So when I see the cake, I decide I'm not going to eat it. But now I have to look at my emotions, and why did I want to eat it in the first place? Was I bored, or sad, or just really wanted cake? Whatever it was. Now I can start looking at that and dealing with the emotional body in that sense. And then you can move on a step further and start thinking about, okay, where's my willpower in this point? What do I actually think about cake? What do I actually think about wanting to eat this all the time? So we keep moving towards the more permanent. As we look at that, our grid or whatever, going from physical to astral to mental and so on, we retreat further inward. So I'm going to stay away from the piece of cake, then I'm going to deal with my emotions about it, then I'm going to deal with my thoughts about it. So constantly getting closer to that spirit and away from the eternal body. external body. Be clear about that. So then that brings us to eliminating desires. We have this idea, especially right now, our society is very much of the more is better. So going back to cake, I would need an endless amount of cake to constantly be eating it to feel like I'm satisfied. But even still, I know that everything's transitory, and eventually I'm going to run out of cake. And when it's gone, I'm just left with what? I want something. So trying to figure out what are these desires I want, where are they coming from, and how do I start to get rid of those? So
you keep talking about food.
Ed's teasing me about talking about food, but you know, I'm talking about cake because I love it so much. And it's been painful for me as my spiritual path to have to give it up because I can't eat gluten. I know, I'm sorry. I should have brought cake. My mom did tell me the first rule, if you give a talk to people, you always bring food. So I'm sorry to you on the internet, you wouldn't have any anyway. But I should have thought of that ahead. Next time, Ed, I'll bring cupcakes for you. Gluten-free, though. Right, you wouldn't want to eat them anyway. So we start looking at our external desires, why we really have them. Annie Besant gave an example in this book here of, she asked someone, the old hillbilly, as we would call it, said, what would make you like the most happy if you had everything in the world, what would it be? And he said, I'd want fat bacon and a swing. She said, okay. Well, I don't think she was really saying it, but so the person said, okay, what if you had all the fat bacon you could imagine and you could swing as much as you wanted? Then what would you want? More fat bacon and more swinging. This is society right now, and we look at all these people who have millions or billions of dollars and huge houses and cars, and they're still not happy. And then you can go over to Africa and see families who are living together with no food and no shoes and really just kind of getting by, a whole community living in one house, but they could be really happy because they have friends and family, they have a community. That's what they need. So looking for things outside, if I get this job, if I get this house, if I get this car, I'll be happy. But if somebody can be happy with nothing, then external things aren't going to fulfill us. So now that we've eliminated our external desires, we know how the laws of nature work. We know that it's all going to go away, so we don't want it anymore. And yet we still feel hurt. We still feel pain. So where is that pain coming from? This is when we really turn inside and say, if I've gotten rid of all that and I still feel pain, it's because of the ego. It's because of what my ego wants, what my personality wants, and it's telling me that there's still some connection I have to this physical world. So I thought of an example of if somebody tells you you're ugly. And if that bothers you, it might suggest that you have some connection to your physical appearance, or maybe you need approval from other people. So then you can say, okay, it's not that I'm ugly, it's that I need approval from other people, and that's what I need to work on. Why do I need that approval? Where does that come from? Let's work on that feeling and emotion and thought instead of being hurt that somebody said I'm ugly. You can also take this a step further and kind of look at where your flaws and mistakes might be. So what are the things about me that I'm not doing right? One example would be if somebody says you're ugly, but points out the one thing that you're really self-conscious about. So this happened to me the other day, of course. I wouldn't come up with the example otherwise. This girl told me that I was ugly. It didn't bother me. I was like, well, that's not a big deal, whatever. And then she says, what? She has pimples on her face. I'm like, oh my God, I do. And I was so self-conscious about it. And I had spent the day trying to cover them up and hoping nobody would notice. And I felt really bad. So then I had to think about, I'm not offended that she said it because it's true. It's there. That she's made a true statement. She didn't do anything wrong. But what is it that's making me feel bad about it? I'm feeling like I'm being judged, that people are going to say, I don't wash my face enough, or I don't do this enough, or I'm unhygienic, or whatever. But what's the flaw behind that? You know, that's a thought, but what's the flaw in my personality that makes me feel that way? And I thought, I don't want people to pity me. I don't want her to judge me. I don't want other people to pity me and say, oh, that poor girl, she doesn't know how to take care of herself. And the reality was, behind that, I pitied myself. Poor me that I have these pimples on my face. And that was the real problem of my ego getting in the way of saying, oh, you have a few pimples, and it must mean all these things about you, and you're a terrible person, or whatever. It's just a few pimples. But I felt bad about it because my ego thought my appearance was important. So being able to look through that whole situation, instead of saying, I'm so hurt that you said I'm ugly, but to realize, wow, I'm feeling bad for myself, and that's something I need to work on. Because my higher self doesn't care if I have a few pimples on my face. I'll tell you that. So those 4 things are the ones I think we can all work on every day, that anybody can kind of make an effort for themselves. The last 2 are much more difficult, and we start getting towards that step of being an adept or a Mahatma. So after you've gone through your ego and torn it down and you're no longer selfish, now you come to the point where you want to live for others. In this section, Annie Besson starts talking about choosing pain, choosing the path of woe to learn endurance and strength. So I want to go through these terrible, awful things like HPB. I will decide to stay here in this terrible, rotting body so that I can finish the secret doctrine. That would be an example of, I'm at a point of living for others. I will take on this terrible thing so that something better may come out of it. And then, and also I have on thinking about in the early years where the Mahatmas really helped HPB get through things and endure the constant struggle, people always putting him down, or the whole Society of Psychic Research and all that. They were there with her to help her keep going, keep her body stable enough so that she could be a benefit to the society. So we can go through all these 5 and have strength and endurance and say, I can deal with anything, I can handle it. But without the last step of learning sympathy and compassion, it's of no use. When I first thought of that, it said it can really do harm. If you don't have compassion, it can be very dangerous and harmful to other people. So I thought of someone who might have walked over hot coals 1,000 times, and they're used to it, and it's easy, and here you come for the first time, and you're kind of nervous about it, and they say, don't worry about it, I've done it 1,000 times, it's easy, you can do it, just be strong, and really build you up. And you say, okay, let me try it. And then you step on it and get 3rd-degree burns and go to the hospital. Maybe that was dangerous. Maybe there was some things they needed to put in place in between. So then I thought about this past January, I was out in California, and I had the opportunity to do a sweat lodge. So again, maybe this is an opportunity presented to me from karma, what I've done in the past, I don't know. Or it could just be a coincidence. You never know. I had no intention to do the sweat lodge because nothing about it appealed to me. Why would I want to go sit in a hot tent for like 2 hours? That sounds terrible. But I had nothing to do, so I'll help you guys set it up. Won't that be fun? And I'll be helpful. So the leader came over, and he's done thousands of sweat lodges. He does this one every month, and he's done them all over the place. And he says, oh, don't worry about it. You can do it. You're strong enough. You can get through it. It's no big deal. And I said to him, I know I'm strong enough to do it. I know I can do it. But I have these anxieties about it. I'm worried of what if I have to go to the bathroom, really was my biggest fear at that point. And so instead of just telling me, don't worry, you can do it, he looked at me and said, okay, I understand. Why don't you sit next to me? And if you get nervous, or if anything, if it's too much for you to handle, just touch my hand, and I'll know, and I can move it along, and we'll open the tent, and you can get out. Okay, now I felt confident that there's compassion there. I knew I could do it. I knew it wasn't a matter of being strong enough to do it. But to have this one guy say, I've done this 1,000 times, and I get it. You're nervous, and you're worried about it, and it's not for everybody. And maybe there is a time where you know yourself best and you should be out, and I will help you through that. That was a sense of true compassion that I felt in that moment. And yes, of course, I went through the sweat lodge, and it was fine, and I won't do it again. But it was one experience, and I did it, and so I can feel good about that. So thinking about all this where you come through, you learn the laws of nature, you learn to let go of your desires, separate yourself from the physical body and the spirit, retreat more into the higher self, and start to learn that compassion so you can come back to help others. Also, this is kind of the epitome of the Mahatmas. They reach enlightenment and then say, yeah, I guess I'll stay around to help out humanity. Wouldn't that be fun? I'll keep taking on karma and dealing with some of the pain and misery that comes along with being on Earth just to help you guys out. So, whenever you think about what does compassion mean, it's right there in their statement. And to really drive that point home, in case you don't believe me yet, HPB made a statement in collected writings about this, and she says, an adept who is sick has no right to use his magnetic force to lessen his personal suffering as long as there is, to his knowledge, a single creature that suffers and whose physical or mental pain he can lessen, if not heal. It is, so to speak, the exaltation of the suffering of oneself for the benefit of the health and happiness of others. So their whole, they're tasked with, they have this ability to heal others, but as long as somebody else needs that healing, they must give it to them before themselves. So this idea of compassion and living for others, I must help everybody else before I can even help myself. And that's why we have to go through those stages of getting rid of the ego and learning to care for other people so that you're not thinking, well, I'm really sick, I could do it, and I know I'm supposed to help other people. It's never a question for them. They know I need to help everybody else more than myself. So overall, we have, we can use pain and illness and health as it comes to us, either through karma or magnetism. We can use it as a way to help our soul evolve, to draw inward, to separate the spirit from the matter, and to get to this point of being able to be of service to others. Any questions? No.
So there's one online.
Okay.
And the question is, if a person is subject to chronic illness, what is the best way to recover his or her health?
That's a really good question. I am not a doctor, so I don't know. But my best guess would be, I'm someone who believes in Western medicine. I am skeptical of things, as I said before. So going through Western medicine, but also trying out the alternative methods of whether it's acupuncture or EFT or Reiki or therapeutic touch. And beyond that, accepting that maybe this is my karma. This is something that I brought in, and my attitude of how I deal with it and how I approach it is going to make a difference. I'm definitely someone who has a chronic illness. I got Lyme disease when I was 11, and it continues to affect me 20 years later. And I've accepted this is just how it's going to be. That new things are going to come up, and I'm going to constantly have problems. I've said too, I've been sick since the day I was born. This is my life. Yes, that's true. I know that's really sad, but it's true. In my life, I constantly have things that come up. This is just how it's going to be. I don't know where I'm going to be at 70 or 80, if I'll make it that long. But the best I can do is go along with it, treat it as it comes up, and do what I can with it. So it's not a great answer. I wish there was a miracle cure. Believe me, I do, but sometimes it's accepting what we have.
Well, what's the miracle cure to karma?
Ed asked what's the miracle cure to karma, and I think the miracle cure is dealing with your karma. That's it, you know, accepting that this is what it is and saying, okay, I have this dealt to me and I can get on with it. Instead of taking the path of woe is me, accepting the path of woe.
It may appear that this is my karma, but it's really not only my karma, but that I cause that affects others around me. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's part of what I was saying. Of we have, you know, a societal karma or a global karma, but you even have it with your friends or your family. I mean, they chose to be with you too. They chose to be your caretaker, or your friend to listen to, or your friend that's going to turn their back on you. Even the nurses or doctors that are in your area that take care of you, they're part of that karma too. So, or the acupuncture or massage therapist you go to, they're all part of that as a healer to help you move forward. Whether you accept it or not and have a belief in the practitioner is a big difference.
So I was joking about the miracle cure of karma, but actually the miracle cure to karma is the spiritual path, to become more compassionate and less ego. That is the cure.
Right. And so if your karma is health and illness, there's still a way to treat it as a spiritual path. This is just, you know, health and illness is a spiritual path, but everything you can go through has their own, well, very similar path, but just, as you said, learning to be more compassionate and breaking down the ego.
So when you talk about karma, are you talking about good karma or bad karma? Like when you say there's a cure for karma, then that implies that karma's bad. I mean...
I don't think there's a difference between good karma or bad karma.
Well, karma is balance.
Right, and that's why...
There is no good or bad karma. Karma means balance.
And that's what I said in the beginning. It's an opportunity. If you've done something wrong, you have an opportunity to make it right, or you have an opportunity to reap the benefits of doing something you've done before. So we decide how to take that, good or bad. It doesn't happen to us. We make it happen.